is CGTN, China Global Television Network. Live from London, this is Global Business.
Hello and welcome to the programme. I'm Robin Dwyer.
And I'm Juliet Mann. Our top stories. Russian and US diplomats hold crisis talks to try to reduce escalating tensions over Ukraine.
Advantage Djokovic. A court victory sees the world #1 tennis star freed from immigration detention in Australia.
Power moves. The French government looks to rein in surging energy prices, warning of social consequences if they're not contained.
And rolling in it, luxury car maker Rolls-Royce reports the highest profits in its 117-year history.
A week of intense diplomacy is underway, aimed at persuading Russia to end its troop build-up on the Ukrainian border.
US and Russian officials are meeting in Geneva, with the Biden administration warning of massive consequences if Moscow invades Ukraine.
While the head of NATO has warned that Europe faces a new armed conflict if diplomatic efforts fail.
We have our correspondents Stuart Smith in Moscow and Guy Henderson in Kiev. But first of all, let's talk to Ross Cullen in Brussels. So, Ross, NATO and Ukraine meeting right now. What's the latest?
Yes, that's right. That meeting between NATO and Ukraine going on almost simultaneously with the United States and Russia talks that are taking place in Geneva. As far as the North Atlantic Treaty Organization is concerned and its talks with Ukraine, we did hear from the Secretary General of NATO earlier, Jens Stoltenberg, said that Russia must remove its forces from Ukraine. Russia must remove its forces from around Ukraine. Russia must demonstrate transparency, and also Russia must de-escalate. He said that if there were further aggressive moves from Russia towards Ukraine, then there would be a high political and a high economic cost to pay, echoing the words of Josep Borrell. Now, he's the EU's foreign policy chief, and he was in Ukraine last week, and he said if there was further Russian aggression, there would be massive consequences, there would be severe costs. Now, also here in Brussels is the Ukrainian Deputy Prime Minister. We'll get a little bit more on the Ukrainian point of view from our colleague Guy later on, but she is here. Olga Stefanishina is here in Brussels, and she said there can be nothing about Ukraine without Ukraine, saying there must be Ukrainian representation, there must be a Ukrainian voice at the table when her country is the topic up for discussion. She says there must be everything done to prevent a Russian invasion of my country. That's what she said earlier here in Brussels, and she is really looking for a support and a reaffirmation from NATO that they do support Ukraine's territorial integrity and Ukraine's sovereignty.
So, Ross, you were just telling us some of those pretty firm statements from Jens Stoltenberg. He's also warned that Europe should prepare for this week's negotiations to fail. So what's the fear in Europe if that happens?
Well, there is no EU-Russia summit scheduled specifically, but we have heard from Wendy Sherman. She's the US Deputy Secretary of State, and she said that there can be no discussion without our European partners and allies. We've also heard from Ursula von der Leyen, the head of the European Commission. You can see the European Union building behind me here in Brussels, and she said that the solution has to come through Europe. You would have heard Emmanuel Macron, the French president, say several times over the last year and a half that Europe must take more action on its collective security, its collective defence, its collective sovereignty. And there will be European Union voices at different meetings. No specific one meeting, though, but we will have Wendy Sherman, the US Deputy Secretary of State, speaking to some of those EU countries tomorrow here in Brussels, and they will be taking part in those broader NATO-Russia talks scheduled for Wednesday, because NATO is made up of many different countries, but a lot of them are in the European Union, some of those big key voices like France and Germany as well.
Ross Cullen in Brussels, thanks very much.
Russia has issued a number of demands ahead of this week's talks, which have already been rejected by NATO. Stuart Smith's in Moscow. I'm good to see you, Stuart. Now, the claim is that Putin has already decided that military action is going ahead. Is that a fair assessment?
Well, US Secretary of State Antony Blinken has said it's impossible to try and understand what the president may be thinking, but he did say clues can be found in their statements and their actions. Let's look at some of the Russian demands to try and see what's on the table, and perhaps that will help to outline what is and isn't possible from these negotiations. The Deputy Foreign Minister, Sergei Ryabkov, said that what Russia is proposing to the United States is a clear position, which contains a number of aspects which are easy to understand and formulated so clearly. But when you look at what's in these, there are still some ambiguous points. For example, Russia and the US will not deploy its military and weapons in areas where the deployment could be perceived by the other as a threat. That's a very broad statement. There are statements or requirements in here which not only would prevent the United States and NATO countries doing something in the future, but also meaning that these countries would have to take action now, scale back their deployments. For example, the US should not have nuclear weapons outside its national territory. And also, there are these statements which, as you said, have already been ruled out as completely unacceptable by the United States, notably that Ukraine and other ex-Soviet countries should not be allowed to join NATO. That is a matter for NATO and other countries wishing to join, the United States says, and not for the USA to get involved with. And this other main point, roll back US military deployments in the region and reduce the number of troops in Eastern Europe. The Secretary of State has said that would be tantamount almost to any action outside its borders.
Stuart Smith in Moscow, thank you very much.
Meanwhile, Ukraine is seeking its own bilateral talks with Moscow on top of those being held in the EU. Let's talk now to Guy Henderson in Kiev. So, Guy, why is Ukraine seeking to negotiate independently with the Kremlin?
Well, back in December, the Ukrainian government had presented a 10-point plan directly to Moscow. As you say, this proposed bilateral format. Step one of that was a proposal for a ceasefire in the east. That was actually implemented. And ultimately, it proposed reforms that would give more autonomy to that eastern part of Ukraine. Those are reforms that are actually Western-backed. So this isn't necessarily Ukraine trying to go its own way. I think it's just a country that wants to make sure that its voice is going to be heard. That is a concern amongst officials in Kiev and for those who have travelled to other parts of Europe and will continue to do so through the week. And I think that 10-point plan will, I'm sure, be discussed in Brussels, in Vienna, during those round of talks that continue to take place with the Russian delegation and other Western delegations present as well. This is a country with its own interests, with its own priorities, and it wants to make very sure, and is trying to do all it can to ensure that it doesn't become a pawn in a spat between superpowers, and that it does actually have its own voice in these discussions.
So, as we were discussing with Ross, NATO's Jens Stoltenberg has said that the West needs to be prepared for talks to fail. What's the mood on the ground in Ukraine?
Well, I think people have been keeping an eye on what's going on in Geneva on day one. I mean, the head of the Russian delegation had threatened to walk out of the talks immediately if the US didn't take its concerns and its demands seriously. We'll find out how well those talks have gone potentially fairly soon, actually, because the Russian Foreign Ministry had scheduled a press conference in Geneva towards the end of the day. We don't know whether that's definitely going to happen. If talks were to collapse, of course, well, Vladimir Putin, the Russian president, has said that military action could be the result. There is no real sense of panic or urgency or sense that there could be immediate military action, certainly here in the capital Ukraine, the capital Kiev, despite reports in recent days of Russian troop build-ups, not just in the east, but also a few hundred kilometres north of here. You know, life continues as normal. You'll probably be able to see the traffic out on the streets. The shops are open during the day. I think the assumption here is that even if they did break down, that a full invasion of Ukraine, certainly as far as the capital Kiev, remains highly unlikely. But of course, observers can make their guesses, their best guesses at what Vladimir Putin's strategic calculations might be. It is only Vladimir Putin himself and a very small number of people around him who will actually know the truth of the matter.
Guy, thanks very much. Guy Henderson there in Kiev.
Well, let's dig into this a little more with Pavel Felgenhauer, who's a defence analyst at Novaya Gazeta in Moscow. Thanks ever so much for joining us, Pavel. So do you think that Putin intends these talks to fail?
It's hard to say. Basically, of course, the official position is that the West has pushed Russia too far. Russia is now pushing back. And Putin has many times already said and repeated it last month that Russia is now built up its capability. It has hypersonic missiles the West does not have, and sort of Russia is number one in nuclear weapons in the world, and that the West should listen and the United States should be ready to make concessions. Well, Russia is not ready to make any concessions anymore. The time of concessions for Russia has passed. So this is a position that most likely does not envisage any swift resolution, and Russia, of course, also demands legally binding agreement, and it can't become legally binding if the American Senate doesn't ratify it, and that requires at least 67 senators, Democrats and Republicans voting for, which is highly unlikely to happen, even if the Biden administration signs something with Russia.
So let's talk about the Biden administration, because the US and NATO have dismissed most of Russia's demands as non-starters. So what's it going to take? What will Biden need to do we need to give Putin to avoid an invasion of Ukraine?
I believe right now it's simply more of a play for time. Kind of drag the thing out a bit. Right now it's dead of winter. And that means in the Great Russian Plain, which Ukraine and Russia are part of, everything is covered with snow. The dirt is frozen. That means you can fight a maneuverable warfare, as it happened during the Second World War in those parts. But that window of opportunity for a winter campaign is rather short. By March, you have to wind up because the thaw begins. There's a lot of snow fallen in Russia and in Ukraine. There's going to be, rivers are going to overflow. So then you have to wait till, I don't know, May. So right now, apparently, the Biden administration hopes that they can kind of dissuade Russia from going now. Then it's going to be postponed to the spring, and then they'll maybe think of something else.
Let's talk about the European Union, because we heard our correspondent earlier talking about European leaders and representatives. There are no specific EU talks scheduled. What role do you see the EU playing in all of this?
Well, the EU wants to play a role. The problem is, of course, they don't have a military arm. They have a foreign policy department there. But its arm is not also very strong, because anything you want to do with the European Union has to be unilateral in foreign policy, and achieving unilateral foreign policy positions in the EU is always rather tricky. But de facto, they're going to, of course, take part. Most of the EU members are members of NATO, and there's going to be a meeting of the Russian NATO Council. Then there's going to be, on the 13th, a meeting in Vienna, where will be OSCE, and all the members of European Union are also members of OSCE. So European Union de facto is going to be taking part, and everyone understands that if there's going to be any kind of sanctions, they'll have to sign on.
But meanwhile, everyone's playing for time. Pavel Felgenhauer, thank you very much.
Thank you.
The president of Kazakhstan has told regional allies that recent unrest, which saw over 160 people killed, was an attempted coup, which the government has survived.
Kassym-Jomart Tokayev's comments came as the country observed a national day of mourning. Andrew Wilson reports.
The streets of Kazakhstan's largest city are quiet again, but everywhere there are signs of the recent violence. Shops and other businesses have been burnt out. This is all that remains of a Main Street bank, the ATM totally destroyed. Almaty appears to have been hit by two separate waves, clashes between demonstrators and security forces, and nighttime raids by unidentified looters. Neither of these stories has been told with complete clarity. On a conference call attended by the Russian leader Vladimir Putin, Kazakhstan's president offered his latest update.
The main aim has become obvious: undermining the constitutional order, destroying the government institutions, seizure of power. We're talking about a coup attempt. It's obvious now that all these actions were coordinated from the same centre, a well-prepared operation that reached a crucial phase. Simultaneous attacks on buildings of regional authority, law enforcement bodies, detention facilities, strategic sites, banks, TV tower and TV stations have demonstrated that.
At the same time, Russian civilians have been boarding military transports in large numbers to get out of Kazakhstan. Even with the streets quiet, the collateral damage to the city's infrastructure has made normal life difficult for many. Russian military units now appear to be the stabilizing influence across the country, and US observers are expressing their concerns about this deployment.
We've made clear that we expect the Kazakh government to deal with protesters in ways that respects their rights, that pulls back from violence at the same time. It, of course, has a right to defend.
The orders now are shoot to kill.
That is something I resolutely reject. The shoot to kill order, to the extent it exists, is wrong and should be rescinded.
As more military forces arrive in the country, China's foreign ministry has announced its concerns about challenges to the region and has offered to step up security and law enforcement relations with Kazakhstan. Andrew Wilson, CGTN.
Watching CGTN Europe. Still ahead. From one court to another, Novak Djokovic is back playing tennis after winning an appeal against the cancellation of his Australian visa.
Search CGTN Europe wherever you get your podcasts to subscribe to The Agenda podcast. The Agenda with me, Stephen Cole, always gets to the heart of the story. Just subscribe today and listen now.
Events have consequences. Words create impact.
One more offensive in a long line of battles that's been ongoing for more...
Just got to be careful here with some gunshots. Excuse us.
The world today matters for your world tomorrow.
The number of casualties is growing quickly.
Why, this is one of the hardest hit towns in the region.
The world today, every day on CGTN.
Facing the unknown is always difficult. In a world in turmoil, it's easy to lose orientation. But when the storms come, we have to see the possibilities. Reinvent. Find new opportunities. Discover a path forward. CGTN. See the difference.
The world has changed under the pressure of the pandemic. For many of us, life is returning to some kind of normal. As we're adapting to changes in all of our lives, let Global Business Europe be your guide to the new normal. Join us weekdays on CGTN.
Beijing, China's capital and its cultural nerve center. A modern metropolis with traditional roots. And now it becomes the first city in the world to host both Summer and Winter Olympics. After 14 years, the biggest sporting extravaganza returns to Beijing. Thousands of athletes from around the globe will compete in over 100 events at 3 zones. Cheered on by over 1.4 billion Chinese citizens and millions abroad. CGTN will bring you a ringside view of the historic event. 2022 Beijing Olympics, the games that matter on CGTN. See the difference.
Welcome back. Novak Djokovic is back on a tennis court in Australia after a court ruled he could leave an immigration hotel.
In a tweet, he said he is grateful for the decision, saying his focus remains on competing in the Australian Open. He'd been barred from entering the country after his visa was cancelled over COVID requirements. His lawyers successfully argued that the star was exempt due to a positive test in December. but the government says it still has the power to deport him. Speaking in Serbia, Djokovic's brother thanked the judge.
We've been following the whole process last night, and it's been a long night for us here in Europe. Obviously, from midnight until 7 a.m. We've been I've been enjoying the process, because I gotta say how much I admire Judge Kelly and the way he led with the whole court process, because I think it was very detailed, it was very thorough, and it was very neutral. And I want to thank him in front of the family for leading the process in such a way, and for showing the world the whole truth and nothing but the truth.
Djokovic's case has galvanized widespread support in his home country, Serbia. In Belgrade, there were celebrations when the Australian court ruled in the tennis star's favour. Alyosha Milenkovic reports.
Many Serbians didn't go to bed last night as the court hearings in the Novak Djokovic case started after midnight local time. National TV stations aired the hearings live stream, while the web news outlets reported situation minute by minute. When the news broke that the court had ruled in favor of Djokovic, it led to celebrations across the country. Djokovic is widely revered here and ranks alongside the inventor Nikola Tesla as one of the most famous Serbs in history. His supporters include all the top political brass in the country, including the president and also the prime minister. In Serbia, many saw this as a victory not just for Novak Djokovic, but for the entire nation. They agree with his father, who last week compared the star's treatment to the NATO bombing of Belgrade in 1999. Among the casualties of the affair could be Anglo-Australian mining company Rio Tinto's plans to open a lithium mine in Serbia, already the target of protests and now surely facing an even bumpier road ahead. Alyosha Milenkovic, CGTN, Belgrade.
Well, let's talk more about this now with Simon Chadwick, who's director of the Centre for the Eurasian Sport Industry. Welcome back to the programme, Simon. So it's looking now likely that Djokovic will play. Do you think tournament organisers will be pleased the world's best players taking part, or worried about the wider implications?
I think in terms of the business and commerce of the tournament, if we consider it solely in that context, then of course the organisers will want him there, because big players, big brands, sponsorships, TV deals are drawn into the sport by the appearance of people like Djokovic. But clearly there is a level of sentiment in Australia right now, and certainly an attitude in government that this is not something that they want. And so I think the ingredients are there for obviously some people to really be supportive of Djokovic, but on the other hand, some people to be deeply critical of him. And we've already heard people saying that they will boo, that maybe they won't even turn up to the matches that Djokovic is playing in.
And this is an issue, isn't it, that's not unique to tennis. We have high-profile basketball players, English football players, for example, who are unvaccinated. So what does this mean for those holding sporting events? We're
in the midst of a great, if you like, moral and ethical dilemma, which is the greater good more important than individual rights? And this seems to be an increasingly pressing debate that has been brought to the fore by the Djokovic case. I think, obviously we've seen in this particular instance government intervention. We saw last week President Macron in France making some very interesting statements about unvaccinated people. And so after 2 years of living through the pandemic, we really are now reaching the point where there is an intense debate about where we go next in moral and ethical terms. In terms of what's been happening to sports so far, all kinds of things have been happening. Initially, we saw lots of postponements and cancellations, rescheduling. Obviously, the Summer Olympics from 2020 didn't take place until 2021. We have the case of the Beijing Games, but also the NBA previously taking place within secure bubbles. But Thomas Tuchel, the Liverpool and Chelsea managers, Jurgen Klopp is adamant that he wants his players vaccinated, whereas Tuchel says, this is an individual decision. It's up to individual players to make the decision. And so what seems to be happening, and this will become more prevalent, I think, is lots and lots of contradictions and conflicts being thrown up within sport. And we're grappling with it at the moment. Sport really is just trying to get through this so that it can continue to stage events and function.
Well, as you say, vaccinations have really been one weapon in the fight to get sports up and running again. So are you surprised that many high-profile sports people aren't in favour of them?
I think that's a really interesting question. We've probably got to make a distinction, I think, between individual athletes and team sports, because I think within team sports, very often there is peer pressure from those individuals around you. You've also got to remember that sports stars are young people, by and large. They're young people. And if we look at vaccine take-up, vaccine hesitancy amongst young people, there are global issues there. I think there's also something too amongst young people. They may feel that they're not going to die, they're not going to be hospitalized, and they are strong enough to get through it. But I think there's also something really interesting. If you look at the number of heart problems that we've seen certainly over the last 12 months, if we think about Christian Eriksen at the Euros, but we've seen regularly in several sports players suffering from heart failure and heart conditions, and that is sometimes being attributed to the vaccination. And so, again, I think we need to understand young people, these young athletes, more, but we also need to understand the effects that vaccinations or not having vaccinations, in other words, catching COVID-19, might have on their bodies. Because I think at the moment we simply don't have the scientific data, the scientific research to justify one approach or another.
Djokovic, of course, world number one. He is a sporting role model for some and has an influence on his fans. Do you think he also has a responsibility?
It's really interesting because, again, as a Westerner, of course, what I would say is we each have a right to choose individually what we think is best. But I know as a Westerner, my view is not necessarily consistent with views elsewhere in the world, where there is a much stronger sense of community and social good, and that the greater is more important than the individual. And it's really interesting, if you listen to some of the statements that Martina Navratilova has made over the last 24 hours or so, she essentially has said that Djokovic should have taken one for the team. In other words, it doesn't really matter what he feels and what he thinks. He's part of the tennis circuit, he's part of the Grand Slam, so therefore he shouldn't be thinking about himself. He should be thinking about the greater good. But I do think we live in ideologically polarized times. Between East and West, where the way in which the East thinks people should lead their lives is one way, and the way in which the West thinks people should lead their lives is another way. And I think what the Djokovic case does is really to flag those very significant differences. As I say, in certain parts of the West, we live in very individualistic, very self-oriented environments, and that's in stark contrast, particularly to environments where, for instance, if we take Australia, people have been subject to to kind of mass confinement for long periods of time, and you can understand why, therefore, for individuals to want to circumvent the regulations that are in place, there would be mass cynicism and criticism of somebody like Djokovic.
Simon Chadwick, great to talk to you. Thanks for joining us today.
Thank you.
The United Arab Emirates is banning international travel for citizens who've not received 3 COVID vaccine doses. But the new rule does not apply to those with medical or humanitarian exemptions. The UAE has seen a sharp rise in infections in recent weeks. Over 2,600 new cases are reported every day. That's nearly 70% of its previous peak.
Across Europe, children are heading back to school amid ongoing uncertainty over COVID-19.
In Greece, as elsewhere, the Omicron strain is dominating rising infections, and parents there are anxious about how schools will cope. Evangelos Ipsos reports.
Back to class in Greece with masks, sanitizers, and more testing. Many are wondering if schools will be able to stay open with the country recording record levels of daily infections. Education Minister Niki Karamel says updated protocols will ensure better protection and containment.
Αποδεχθήκαμε και πάλι τις εισηγήσεις της Επιτροπής.
We have listened to our health specialists and decided to change the measures due to the Omicron variant. We have decided to put in place more measures and more testing at schools to ensure a smooth transition for students and teachers.
The new measures include a rise in the number of mandatory tests for both pupils and teachers, including testing an entire class when an infection is reported. Unvaccinated students will have to test several times a day, while any unvaccinated staff must test themselves 5 times per week. A requirement for masks both in and out of the classroom and a ban on school trips remain in effect. Teaching unions, though, say more could have been done.
The first thing the authorities need to do is to figure out which schools are overcrowded. Classes with more than 20 pupils should be split in half. Then the government should ensure there are more cleaning staff. This should have been done at the start of the pandemic. Every time a class goes on a break, the whole room should be sanitised.
Within hours of the first ring bell of the new year, the government has confirmed some 14,000 parents and students tested positive for COVID-19. As well as that, some parents are keeping their children home worried that they might contract the virus.
We're really concerned that the Minister of Health doesn't want to sit down with us and listen to our proposals. We represent all teachers and students of this country. We see the government spending money on defence systems, but for the most precious commodity, our children's health and education, they don't spend a single euro. That's why we will gather later this week and protest with teachers and parents in front of the ministry so we can be heard.
Whatever the arguments over which measures are right, schools are now back open. With Omicron having an impact on every aspect of life, teachers, parents, pupils, and the government are all waiting nervously to see how well these measures work. Evangelos Ipsas for CGTN, Athens.
Still ahead, record sales, record profits. Rolls-Royce sees a bumper year for its luxury vehicles.
It is now important that all of us in Europe act very swiftly.
Fines for the non-vaccinated will most likely be between $1,000 and $4,000.
The new Omicron variant circulating in southern Africa.
The financial markets have also reacted badly to the news.
Growing dissatisfaction with the way the Dutch government is handling the pandemic.
Cancelling the city's main public Christmas markets for the second year in a row.
Protests and riots by those opposed to restrictions and vaccinations.
There is no room for complacency in this ongoing battle against COVID.
On the agenda with me, Stephen Cole, we look up into space. We look down into data. We look at debt. We look at politics. We look at opioids, climate change. We look at all the issues that really matter around the world. But you matter too. We want to tell the stories you want to see and hear about. Make it your agenda.
The agreement is signed. But what is the real deal now the UK has left the EU? For trade, for business, for the city, for ordinary people. Make sense of Brexit with CGTN.
Ever wondered what's the difference between a bear and a bull market? Where are the cash cows? And who are the lame ducks? And what exactly are black swans? Grey rhinos? And unicorn companies? Make sense of it all with global business, only on CGTN.
Welcome back. Now, if you've been spoiling yourself and splashing the cash after a tough time during the pandemic, it seems you're not alone. Luxury car maker Rolls-Royce has announced the highest profits in its 117-year history, up a whopping 49% in 2021 compared to a year earlier. Now, sales to clients across the globe soared to a record 5,586 cars, with most regions, including China, the Americas and Asia-Pacific, seeing all-time record sales. Well, let's talk to Torsten Müller-Ottbos, the CEO of Rolls-Royce Motor Cars. He's at Rolls HQ in Goodwood in the UK. Great to see you again. And what a year, what a year. But, you know, I thought that the global shortage of semiconductor chips was a real industry issue. So how have you done it?
I mean, we have managed ourselves quite successfully through that storm, to call it like that. And that was also very much to the reason that we are part of the bigger BMW group, which managed, I think, that chip shortage topic very well. So we always got preferential deliveries with semiconductors, whatever we needed for our production here. And I haven't lost a single car being built for clients due to semiconductors. So that was great.
You mentioned BMW. Now, I know you don't publish numbers separately from them, but would you say that you're as profitable now as Italy's Ferrari, you know, 50% return on investment?
I mean, we are not in any way issuing financial numbers, but allow me to say we are very profitable, and I think the BMW Group is quite proud of owning Rolls-Royce.
Oh, I'm always trying you with numbers, and I thought maybe this time that you would reveal something that you shouldn't, but foiled again. Look, sales they're also strong in your used Rolls motors. So talk about your provenance programme. Is that a bit of a nod to going green?
I mean, the provenance program is very much, you would call it used business, used car business, which is also very strong due to the fact that we were very short in delivering new cars, and we have a long, long waiting list now, up to a year. If you order today a Rolls-Royce, it takes 1 year from now to take delivery. And for that reason, many clients who weren't prepared to wait as long were immediately on, let's say, provenance cars, so younger used Rolls-Royces, and that also have drawn that business in a substantial way.
So are you saying if I wanted to order one of the new electric Spectres, I'm going to have to wait a year beyond the launch date?
I think we currently see an excellent order intake already for Spectre. I'm saying currently, when you order not Spectre, you can put your interest down for Spectre, but you can't officially order the car yet. Order books will be opened later this year, but you can put your interest down and we will record that. And we have already a nice growing list of interested clients worldwide for Spectre.
And of course, I'm top of the list for a test drive once it rolls off the production line. Look, you mentioned that younger clientele. So let's talk about who are driving Rolls-Royces these days, because you've got this black badge range. That's geared at a much younger, more youthful customer. So where are they coming from?
I think we have rejuvenated the brand massively over the last 10 years. When I started here 12 years ago, we had an average age of 56, and we are now down to 43, and that is very young, because that basically means for everybody who is 60, you have a client who is around 20. And I think Black Badge was one reason for that, but also that, and interesting to know, that it has changed quite massively. When I started, 80% of our clients were interested in being chauffeured. This is now 80% they want to drive themselves, and only 20% to be chauffeured. Slightly different, obviously, in China, but the way to drive a Rolls-Royce is very much the owner behind the wheel, and not any longer so much in the back of the car. So all these kind of developments have changed the brand quite massively. We've also found complete new ways how to address people. We have rejuvenated the way how we talk to people, how we position the brand. So that all helped to make us contemporary and to be seen by even very young clients as, and they call it cool, as a cool brand and something they are aspiring.
Cool and very much in the driving seat. Torsten Müller-Opos, always a pleasure talking to you. Thanks very much for your time this afternoon.
Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot.
Well, protecting customers and businesses from rising energy costs is a top priority for the French government, according to Minister Bruno Le Maire. He's been talking to big energy firms about how to keep prices in check at a time when wholesale costs have surged. Let's talk now to our correspondent Ryan Thompson in Paris. So, Ryan, Bruno Le Maire has been meeting with the European Commissioner for Trade. What have they been talking about?
Hi there, Robin. Well, we're awaiting the details of what exactly was happening in that meeting with kicked off about 30 minutes ago at a press conference in about 20 minutes' time. But we know that for a number of days. And going into this week, the French Minister for Finance, Bruno Le Maire, is really on a crusade to stop what he fears will be an explosion of energy prices and ripple effects that will be felt throughout the French and European economy as homes and businesses feel these effects. He wants a plan in place by the end of the week that will really offer a solution to rising energy prices, because the way it works here in France is that there's set prices for the year. Those change on February 1st. Of course, we are quickly approaching this date. They found a way to keep prices under control when we started to see other European countries, in the UK, for example, see that energy crunch in late 2021. But now, as this deadline is approaching, he wants a plan in place. One way that the French government has done this so far is by reducing the taxes that is actually charged on people paying for electricity to the minimum that they can go within EU rules. But there is still that EU minimum there. So we likely expect a lot of this meeting to focus on the fact of how much will the EU be willing to budge to meet some of these domestic concerns that could potentially also affect European customers in other countries, Italy, Spain, for example. We really expect Bruno Le Maire to make the case, do a bit of lobbying to see how much he can get his European counterpart to potentially move on this issue so that the French government can adjust it and potentially pass off some of these price increases in a much more easy way to customers, to allow this circular economy system to actually move about so that businesses don't feel the effects, they don't push that price onto consumers, and we don't see a rising game of inflation here.
And Ryan, the economy will be a big issue, won't it, with the presidential election just a few months away now?
Absolutely. In an interview this morning, Bruno Le Maire was making the same case, saying that there could be huge social consequences of a major surge in living costs that could come from energy but potentially be passed on to other things. You know, Robin, it wasn't that long ago that we were talking about the Yellow Vest protests here in France. And if you remember what that started over, it was people in different parts of the country who said the price of gas, the tax on gas and petrol, was just too high to be sustained for their type of living. And that's why they took to the streets, because they felt that the government in Paris was too focused on the people in Lyon, in Lille, and of course in the French capital, but not on the working class French who often have a different standard of living. This is very much the same thing where Bruno Le Maire is warning that that could potentially enter the dialogue again, especially in an election year. He pointed to the situation in Kazakhstan, where many people are taking to the streets over issues with the price of living right now. The current French inflation rate is at 3.4%, which is the highest it's been since 2008. And really, the government here, from Jean Castex, the Prime Minister, to Bruno Le Maire, is trying to do everything they can to ensure that they can keep the situation on control in this election year. And when Emmanuel Macron potentially, and we expect him to eventually, announce his candidacy for the president, they obviously want businesses to see his appeal.
Ryan, good to talk to you. Ryan Thompson there in Paris.
On the currency markets, the UK pound sterling continues to rise against all other major currencies, hitting its highest level against the euro since February 2020. Analysts say the boost comes on Bank of England rate hike bets. But UK Omicron concerns could put pressure on the pound and drive movement in both directions.
Shares in embattled Chinese developer Shemao jumped nearly 20% on reports it's selling all its projects. The company failed to make a payment on a trust loan last week, triggering a trading suspension for 3 of its bonds. China's real estate developers have come under pressure after the government ramped up efforts to fight speculation and high leverage in the sector.
Emerging economies must prepare for US interest rate hikes. The International Monetary Fund has warned. Faster than expected Federal Reserve moves could shake financial markets and trigger capital outflows and currency depreciation abroad, the IMF posted in a blog.
Apple chip maker TSMC has hit another quarterly sales record as strong demand continues. The foundry in Taiwan, which also manufactures chips for other companies, reported December revenue of $5.6 billion, a record number for a single month and up 4.8% from November.
Tragedy in New York City with one of the worst fires in its history. 19 people, including 9 children, have died after flames spread rapidly through an apartment block. Well, our correspondent John Terrett is in New York. John, it is horrible. What happened?
Well, you know, Juliet and Robin, I was on duty yesterday reporting this story, and things just kept getting worse. The longer the time went on, the worse the news was. The fire broke out at about 11 a.m. local time, so that's 16 hours GMT on Sunday, pretty much 24 hours ago, almost to the minute. And it's at the Twin Park Apartments in the Fordham Heights district of the Bronx, which is one of the 5 New York boroughs. According to Eric Adams, who is the brand new mayor, he was only sworn in on the 1st of January. This is one of the worst fires in New York's recent history, something that was agreed upon by the New York Fire Commissioner, Daniel Nigro, who said that there were more than 60 people injured in the fire, more than 30 people taken to hospital with life-threatening injuries, including cardiac arrest and respiratory issues. And then came the terrible news that, in fact, 19 people had died in this 19-story apartment block, and 9 of them were children. Now, according to Dan Nigro, the fire commissioner, the fire broke out on the 2nd or 3rd story of the building, and the people who left the apartment where it started did not close any doors behind them. And the effect of that was that thick black smoke rose up through the building, trapping people. And Dan Nigro said that they found injured people on every floor, including the 19th, which he said was very unusual. Now, the exact cause of the fire is still not known for certain, but the finger of blame is being pointed at a space heater, you know, one of those portable heaters that people use to give a little bit of extra heat to the room. Most of them have some kind of filament that heats up, and it looks at the moment as if that's what was the cause of the original blaze. Fire marshals are on the scene trying to work out what happened. In the meantime, all the people who lived in that block, many of them from Africa, are now homeless and are being housed for the time being in a local school where they'll be given food and shelter. The governor of New York State says that they'll do everything they can, including giving them money or whatever it is they need, in order to get back on their feet. It also raises immigration issues because many of those families are living apart from their loved ones. And of course, it comes just days after a major fire in Philadelphia, which is the next big city to New York, to the south, about a 90-minute drive away. Last week, there was a fire in a row house, as Americans call it, or a terrace house, as we would say in the UK, that killed 12 people, including 8 children. So just to reiterate, Eric Adams saying this is one of the worst fires in the history of New York City.
It's not the news that we want to be talking about, and I know that you'll update us when there's more information about that. But if you'll forgive me in doing a complete flip and talking about something completely different, Donald Trump, his lawyers are in court again. Can you talk us through the latest there?
Yes, the case gets underway in about an hour's time at about 1 o'clock local time. This is Judge Amit Mehta who's going to hear oral arguments in this case. And Trump's lawyers are seeking to overturn and stop 3 cases against President Trump, former President Trump, basically which say that he incited the January the 6th assault on the Capitol last year. And these lawsuits come from lawmakers themselves, all of them Democratic, and also members of the Capitol Police who were on duty that day. And among the lawmakers are Eric Swalwell, who's a very controversial representative in the House of Representatives representing California, and Jerry Nadler, who represents the 10th District in New York, and then the 2 police officers. And they basically say that Trump was liable for the injuries that they sustained, both mental and physical, on that day because of that fiery speech that he delivered before his supporters walked up to the Capitol and before the assault began. Now, 2 things of interest here. One is that they've invoked an 1871 law, a law from 1871, which was an anti-Ku Klux Klan law which prohibits political intimidation. So that is being cited within these three suits from the four people bringing them forward. And, of course, it's worth pointing out that President Trump has already been impeached by the House and then found not guilty in the Senate over inciting January the 6th and the riots that happened there. But what is going to be very interesting with this case is how much light it sheds on the possibility of civil cases against President Trump and his supporters and those who were backing him at the time in the future, if civil cases are brought forward. So that's why we're watching this case very closely. Guys?
Keep watching it closely. John Terrett in New York, thank you for those updates.
Still ahead here on CGTN. Why did the ostrich cross the road? Dozens of escaped birds enjoy a night on the town in southern China.
Each day, there are millions of stories. Each one can open new perspectives, new possibilities. Wherever you look, we are there. To see, discover, explore. We put the pieces together to find what really matters to you. All around the world, all around the clock. Our reporters are at home across the globe. From our headquarters in Beijing and production centers in Washington, Nairobi, and London, China Global Television Network. Stories from across the globe, reaching people across the globe. CGTN. See the difference.
Mari, what would you say is a good question?
Stephen, I'd say it's one where there's always more than one answer.
The Answers Project is a new podcast series from CGTN Europe. With me, Stephen Cole.
And me, Mari Beveridge. In each episode, we'll take a complex question.
And with the help of some of the world's foremost experts, shine light on some of the answers. So join us for The Answers Project.
Available wherever you get your podcasts.
Welcome back to Global Business Europe.
After the longest coalition negotiations in Dutch history, Mark Rutte is beginning his fourth term as Netherlands Prime Minister.
As Stefan de Vries reports, there are big challenges ahead.
No one believed in it anymore, except maybe Mark Rutte himself. For the fourth time, the Prime Minister will stand on the steps of the Royal Palace in The Hague as head of a Dutch government. After 10 months of complex negotiations, the outgoing four-party coalition has decided to continue working together. To most people's surprise, their new agreement is more progressive than before, with big spending earmarked for climate change, the pandemic, infrastructure, defence and housing. For the first time, there are as many women as men in the government team. There are new faces, but also some familiar names. Wopke Hoekstra and Sigrid Kaag have switched places. Hoekstra becomes the Minister of Foreign Affairs, while Kaag will be the new Finance Minister. She will be the most prominent representative in Brussels for a country with a new, more pro-European outlook. Eyes will also be on Ernst Kuipers, a doctor and director of Rotterdam University Hospital. He became one of the most famous faces on Dutch television during the pandemic. He's now the new health minister, charged with leading the country out of the pandemic and reforming the healthcare system. One of the biggest challenges for the new government is the rise in public mistrust and anger towards politics and politicians. The Netherlands has seen some of Europe's biggest opposition and protests against COVID-19 policy. Many Dutch lawmakers say they don't feel safe, a shock in a country where ministers prefer to ride bicycles than to use their official cars. The new government's first test will be next Friday. Mark Rutte and his new health minister will have to decide if the broad lockdown that has closed most public places since mid-December can be eased despite the wave of new coronavirus cases. Stefan de Vries, CGTN, Amsterdam.
China and Saudi Arabia have vowed to boost cooperation in energy and trade. Foreign Minister Wang Yi met his Saudi Arabian counterpart in East China. Prince Faisal bin Farhan Al Saud is visiting China along with senior diplomats from Kuwait, Oman and Bahrain. Wang says China is willing to help the kingdom diversify its oil-dependent economy.
The ousted leader of Myanmar has been sentenced to another 4 years in jail in the latest legal ruling against her. Aung San Suu Kyi was convicted after an initial ruling in a military court last month of illegally possessing walkie-talkies and breaking COVID rules. The Nobel laureate, who has been held in detention since last year's coup, is facing around a dozen charges, which have been described as a sham by the UN.
South Korean Squid Game star Oh Young-soo was one of the winners at a scaled-back Golden Globe Awards. The Power of the Dog and West Side Story were also recognised at the event, which took place online only, with no celebrities attending. It comes amid allegations of corruption and a lack of diversity in the Globe's voting body.
China saw high-speed trains set off from Xichang for the first time this Monday.
It's a significant breakthrough in domestic travel and marks the start of high-speed trains being deployed in more remote areas. Xu Xinchen took a ride aboard the bullet train.
It is the first time Jiku Wuzire and his classmates get to experience the high-speed rail.
This is a convenient and easier way for people to get to other places outside Liangshan.
These teens from smaller counties of Liangshan Yi are pursuing better education in Xichang, the prefecture capital. It used to take hours for them to travel on slow trains. Now, they're able to get to their destinations in under an hour. This Yi autonomous prefecture is known for its complex terrains, with this location being vulnerable to both wind and water. Construction took over 5 years to complete. Liangshan was among the last few regions in China that got out of poverty. And with the new high-speed rail, more opportunities are coming.
Due to our geology, there might be people who fall back into poverty if they encounter illness or natural disaster due to our location. The opening of this high-speed rail will certainly help us get more information, investment, and technology, which will boost our economy.
I also met a mother of 3 who just returned to Liangshan via this route.
现在放假了。放假要回来了啊！就以前是怎么回来？以前我们就今年刚过去的。刚过去啊？那怎么过去的呀？当时是坐火车过去的。但是坐的是慢车。慢车。但是要多久啊？3个多小时。3个多小时啊！现在回来是一个半左右。感觉怎么样啊？比那个好多了。
The young mother took her kids to Panzhihua as a way to ensure a better education for their children. And with this new high-speed rail, for Wuzire and his peers, it also means more possibilities for their future.
Xu Xinchen, CGTN, Liangshan Yi Autonomous Prefecture.
And finally, they could give a bullet train a run for its money. There were chaotic scenes in southern China as dozens of ostriches went on the run this weekend. As many as 80 birds are reported to have escaped from a farm and were filmed dashing through the streets. Now, when they were done checking out the nightlife downtown, about 50 were recovered, but some are still missing. And as for how they escaped, there's so far been no suspicion of foul play.
Terrible. Well, that's it for Global Business Europe. Thanks for watching.
There's more on all of our stories at europe.cgtn.com, and do follow CGTN Europe on Twitter, Facebook and Instagram.
We're on smart TV apps, Roku, Apple TV, Amazon Fire and Android TV, YouTube and Dailymotion, CGTN.com and the CGTN app, and in the UK, 24 hours a day on Freeview.
Coming up next on CGTN Africa Live. We'll see you again tomorrow, same time, same place. From all the team here in London, goodbye.
Goodbye.